welcome everybody, and yeah, to all those brave people from Europe as well who spent the evening with us. So short intro about myself and the panelists. So I actually started off as a sustainability consultant and as a 8,000 auditor traveling around in Asian factories. And at that time, I also noticed that the concepts of audits and certificates is perhaps not the solution to everything. And therefore, I actually launched my own company, Sustify, where we focus on capacity building with digital training, with an integrated grievance management system. And yeah, very much want to improve compliance with this new approach. Yeah. And yeah, but now to our great panelists. So I start with Monica. I see her on the top of my screen. So Monica is a procurement professional and worked many years in the fast fashion industry, also for Zara in Spain. And yeah, because this industry, yeah, is not that sustainable as she wanted it to be, she actually decided to launch her own consultancy now, making global supply chains fairer and more transparent. Yeah, then next one in my row here is Dennis. And Dennis has a PhD in sustainable supply chain management. He's a lecturer, a researcher, and has a passion for innovations such as blockchain, artificial intelligence, and RFID. And then Nina, at the moment I can't see her, but I know that she's there. And Nina had senior global positions in buying, manufacturing, and sustainability, and she lived in Bangladesh, South Korea, and China. And her focus lies on transparency, on circularity, and diversity, including gender equality. Yeah, so well, we are all looking forward to our conversations, and we hope you will find all that useful. And I propose that we have a quick round with our first questions, which is what actually means more sustainable apparel industry for you? And just in, very short 2 sentences, Monica, to start off.
I think I would define sustainability as our collective efforts to safeguard the planet's finite and natural resources, as well as conducting our business in a responsible way that creates a positive impact for people and planet, and not a negative one.
Okay, Dennis, do you want to continue?
Well, actually, I strongly believe that the apparel and fashion industry can be a force for good, a force which provides wealth and health to human and nature, which rediscovers its beauty, which respects and values every single actor and every single individual who is a member of the supply chain.
Great. And Nina?
Hi, everyone, and sorry for being a bit late into this call. To be frank, more sustainable anything doesn't really mean anything to me at this point. I think it's a very vague way of communicating around sustainability. But what I agree is with the previous panelists and their view of being respectful of the planet, planetary boundaries, and the people who are working within that space. And my hope is that we can have more science-based measuring tool for us to be able to give more meaning to that sentence.
Okay, great. And I think in this session, we will also concentrate on very practical approaches so that we fill this buzzword with a little bit more content. Yeah, so Monica, if you look back like 10 or 20 years ago, when sustainability wasn't as known as it is now, a lot of things changed. And what do you think were actually the biggest changes and also achievements in the industry up to now?
Yeah, there's been huge change, positive change. I'd like to add. The fashion supply chain by nature is very labor intensive. So 10 years ago and more, there was a big focus on cost and efficiency. Those were the main drivers. There was also no incentive to do good, and likewise no penalty if you weren't conducting business in whichever way. So that has drastically changed, because now we have to consider all the issues in the ESG space, not only cost. So really lowest cost is becoming much less of a priority. Of course, cost will always be important to the health of a business, but we have all these other issues to consider and to factor in. So essentially, our jobs have become a bit more complex because before it was fairly easy to launch a tender, go to the lowest bidder and place your order. Whereas now we have to really look at who we're working with and our suppliers and ensure that we're conducting our business in a correct way.
Okay, Nina, do you want to add something to that, especially from your view, which is a little bit more the environmental, ecological side of sustainability?
I would say, if I would just zoom it out a bit, or even also backtrack the approach towards sustainability, both from I would say environmental and social aspects, used to be very much each and every company kind of defines what sustainability is for them and create their own way of measuring it, and then they kind of ask the supplier to report back to it, and it might have been some kind of audit connected to it, which meant that in average, a supplier would spend something around 300, and there are different numbers. So it's 370 days a year, which is like more than every day in a year, just complying to these different requirements that came from different brands and businesses, right? And they were similar or different, but it was very work intense. So the biggest shift that I have seen, the industry has seen, is that there are more how do you say, actions in place to harmonize the way how things are being measured and what sustainability is, and how capacity is built, which I'm sure, Sonja, you know about this as well. Activities and standards in place that are like we have the SACs, Higg Index, and SLCPs out there that are both creating a language with like a common language where we're basically saying this is what we mean with sustainability, but also like harmonizing it. So once one supplier has complied with one, then that's it. Then they can focus on capacity building. So I guess that's one of the biggest shifts that I've seen.
Okay. Yeah, and well, the focus of this session is fashion, and for me, sometimes when I was traveling around, then I saw other factories as well, you know, like metal industry, for example, or chemicals, and I was actually surprised and thought, like, hang on, we're all the time talking about fashion, and often other industries, in my view, were much worse. However, Dennis, you know, we were talking about about this industry before and the specialties, and I wanted, to ask you, in your view, why is it fashion industry we are actually focusing so much on?
Well, I think this is pretty much linked to your very first question to Monica at the beginning. And probably it's also quite a good point to highlight a little bit dark side of the fashion industry, right? If you look back on how the fashion industry developed over the past 25 years, we need to admit actually that the industry took a very disastrous course since the 90s, when fashion businesses increasingly began to outsource production overseas, to exploit low-cost production, Monica mentioned before, while at the same time, consumer desire for wardrobe refreshments, continuous refreshment of their wardrobes increased dramatically. Production of shirts and shoes has more than doubled in the past quarter century. And it's a fact, actually, that our wardrobes contain 80 to 150 pieces, of which around only 25 or 30%, or not only, are not worn at all, right? So the prices for apparel and footwear decreased over time significantly since the 90s. And the industry is still increasing the use of petroleum-based synthetic. So this is the fact, this is the reality. And due to this development, we see an apparel industry which is characterized by unfair buying practices, by downward price and lead time pressures on suppliers, deficient forecasting and order planning, overproduction, significant power asymmetries in supply chains, and the shift of responsibility when it comes to sustainability, which will inevitably cause human rights violations and negative environmental impact.
Okay, I mean that sounds a little bit dark, so we need some some concrete ideas now to what can we actually do. So Nina, you are an expert in circularity. So in this field, what would you say, and which advices would you give? What could a procurement department do to make the supply chain more sustainable from your point of view?
So I'm sure a lot of people already know what like circular economy is, but I'm just going to do a quick crash course. So the current economy that we have, at least from like a manufacturing perspective, is that you have an idea around the product, you source the product, you produce it in X amount of pieces, you sell it, and people buy it and use it for X amount of times, and it's anywhere between 0 to 5 times an average, unfortunately. And then when they are not, they don't need it anymore, they throw it away. And this goes not just with fashion. This is our approach to majority of all the products that are being produced right now. So the concept of circular economy is that it's based on 3 parts. One is that you design the product for longevity, but also for you to be able to use that product, the material, and loop it back in as a resource by the end of its time or whenever you don't need it. You prolong the usage of that product with different business models. And finally, you kind of mimic the ecological models that are already out there. So it should, in the best of worlds, be absorbed into nature in a natural process. That's the baseline, right? And what we see right now is an increased amount of businesses popping up around the second-hand model or resell models, which is connected to prolongation of the products, the usage of product. But when you actually look into the impact that is necessary to be created, then you actually need to be able to recycle those materials and loop them back in a more efficient way. And currently there is only less than 1% of all textiles that are being recycled into actually new garments. There are bigger portion that are being downcycled into car fillings, but from garment to garment is like very low levels. And they are partly because of lack of innovation, but they're also partly because the let's say reverse supply chain, if you want to call it, and the infrastructure is not there. So for a really long time, we have been great at optimizing and creating an efficient supply chain based on the linear model. So what we need is to actually look into how we can create and close that loop and create infrastructure that enables that whole taking back and recycling it, looping it back in. We need innovation, we need new way of setting up supply chain, and we need a lot of new laws and regulations in place for that to actually happen.
Okay. In terms of regulation, I mean, that's what we often think, that, you know, oh, there are new laws and new regulations. Let's just send a code of conduct to the suppliers or perform another audit. So I would like to ask you, Monica, how do you see the limitations of audits, labels, and code of conducts? And what else perhaps could a procurement department do outside those, let's say, typical procedures we know?
Yeah, there's an issue with these code of conducts or paper commitments. So basically a company will send out their code of conduct and get the supplier to sign it, and it's kind of the end of that. There's really no follow-up from the company. As long as the supplier signs the code of conduct, then everyone seems to be relaxed. And similarly with audits or third-party providers, unfortunately, it's a reality, but in low-cost countries, you know, there's still a lot of fraudulent activity and corruption. So we can't rely on these third-party audits to be a guarantee that the supplier is behaving in an ethical way. So we have to kind of follow up on that and not relax, just you know, having our code of conduct signed. And I think it goes back to visibility in your supply chain. I think one of the basic premises for sustainability is understanding your supply chain. Who are the actors in your supply chain? And it's not just about the one-dimensional facts and figures about your supplier, but it's, you know, who is this person who owns this factory, who's employing X amount of people, really getting to know their operation, and being in touch on a regular basis, really opening that communication with the supplier and getting to know them and their operations. From a procurement perspective, yeah, you know, procurement professionals don't have that much free time on their hands because the day-to-day can be very busy. So it's really about deepening that relationship and creating that trust and that frequent communication, just to check in with your supplier and just make sure that that you have shared values, you have a shared vision, and you agree on the way you want to conduct business together.
Yeah, I think that would be an ideal world. It's just that like a couple of days I spoke with a potential customer and he said, well, we have 600 factories in China, so what should I do? So I know, Dennis, that you are very much into this as well. So exactly. What is your help on that then?
Well, actually, I totally agree with Monica and everything what she says. When I was actually in the field in Vietnam, Indonesia, to intensively investigate compliance practices and their effectiveness, meaning certification schemes, standards. These certification schemes, the traditional compliance model, turn out to be a true farce. Although they might be supportive, they might enable some performance measures, they have been used very unfortunately instrumentally by the industry to show sustainable practices and communicate it to stakeholders out there. However, as has been said, the traditional compliance models turned out to be another significant pressure on suppliers. Now taking on the suppliers' duty is probably also important and critical. While suppliers strive to win orders from buyers by offering lowest prices, shortest lead times, and good quality, the costs for the implementation of these standards and compliance models or certification schemes are carried usually by the suppliers themselves, leaving them with super tough times to deal with these paradoxes, actually. As an example, social standards do evaluate the use of excessive overtimes. But here the question is, how should suppliers comply with overtime regulations if buyers place unexpected or last-minute orders? Because they very deficiently calculated market demand. So how is that possible? Suppliers are then forced to decide whether they are taking the penalties, such as organizing air flights, right? Or rather opt for excessive overtime, which is the cheaper part actually to do so, to fulfill the order on time. Suppliers are in a constant balancing act, and the current under the current sourcing practices, these sustainable management tools, compliance practices do steer very, very obviously towards nothing, and will only increase the pressure on suppliers, which will then not improve any human rights or environmental impact, right? So this is what I experienced with all my factory visits and case studies over there.
So what would you say, you know, if somebody in the procurement department then says, okay, we want to have fairer practices and more sustainable practices. So that means there are less last-minute orders or less changes, or what do you think could be a more human behavior than towards those suppliers?
I mean, if we are talking now directly with that example, for instance, getting rid of last-minute orders or surprising orders, how suppliers they sometimes call, then the business needs to make more accurate demand forecasts, right? The market demand forecasts are not accurate enough. And obviously this always leads to high pressure. But if we take a look on what business needs to do very immediately and can also do very immediately, or from a sourcing perspective, first and foremost, it's for sure to embed sustainability first into the organizational culture within business. So the top management, the leadership need to have full commitment to sustainability, because this is a very fundamental step actually, which will define the policies of that company. And with the policies, you define strategies. And with that strategies, now you can really exert sustainable sourcing practices, because the respective sourcing professionals or procurement professionals will then have the necessary resources. As Monica said before and pointed, like, we don't have that much time actually to think too much about sustainability, because it is not supported at all. And yeah, a very fundamental step is to implement and embed sustainability into top management level.
Okay, Monica, you wanted to jump in here.
I just wanted to add that if that's the case, you have 600 suppliers, and that would be the case for many of the larger companies. And also added to the fact that fashion, the product variety is so huge. You need all those different suppliers for the different materials. I would say the first approach would be to simplify your supply chain as much as possible, because the fashion supply chain is already complex by nature. You have multi-tiers, you have all these suppliers, manufacturers, mills, distributors, and they're distributed across the globe. So it's a very complex operation. So with that in view and with sustainability in mind, the more you simplify and the more you can gain control of your supply chain and really understand who your suppliers are. And I know it's a tough deal when you're dealing with 600 suppliers, but it's really, I can't emphasize enough the fact that it's really important to know who are each and every one of those suppliers, if you have any doubts or in your mind, then it would be preferable to reduce those suppliers, delist those suppliers, and focus really on those important partners where your core business is. You know, start there with your core business, and try to get that under control as much as possible, so you avoid, as well as Dennis said, all these last minute reactory orders that only put more pressure on the supply chain.
Okay, Monica, and when you're when you're saying collaboration, for example, often that's very abstract, and what would you actually recommend somebody if we are saying collaboration is so important? What does it mean? You know, what exactly would you do to collaborate?
Collaborate. First of all, you would choose the right partners for your business, right? Every business is different. The priorities, that's it, within the SDG framework, there are so many issues to deal with. So everyone has their own list of priorities. Choosing the right partners and then going on to collaboration. It's about having that open communication and also the trust. So collaboration is not just about mutual contribution and mutual support, which are very important, but it's also that level of trust with your suppliers. That's it. You trust that you share the same vision, you communicate and discuss that vision, and you're just working constantly in partnership. So moving from those transactional relationships, which is just, that's it, just simple business transaction, we're moving on to this framework of a partnership where we're looking at the long-term goals together. We're trying to innovate together. We're trying to uncover synergies that might, that arise from our daily interactions, and really deepening those collaborations so that sustainability eventually comes easy to all parties involved.
Okay. So, well, we have covered collaboration. Now we are coming to the regulations. Of course, we need to mention the German supply chain law and the EU directive. And I know that you, Dennis, you are very happy about all this, which is going to come. So I wanted to hear from you, how do you see that? What are the limitations of such regulations, and what are the chances?
Well, indeed, it is so good to see this long overdue historical European directive, or the German Act. Although we all know it comes with serious gaps and holes, such as leaving further upstream suppliers out, and do not consider too much on tier 2 or subcontractors. I believe that this due diligence duties, nevertheless, are the very, very first step to force fashion businesses to make sustainability a leadership and top management duty. The ongoing lag that I mentioned before, right? Indeed, right after the announcement of these legislations, and I can say something on my own experience. When this was being announced, many companies that I work with through my laboratory, they approached me and asked me, like, Dennis, what do we need to do now with the German Act, for instance, and lately with the European directive? Is what we do enough? How can we comply with these legislations? So obviously, business will take it very serious, and it is a big push for fashion businesses for taking on accountability. When it comes to grievance systems, for instance, or complaints mechanisms that are very much part of it, right? There are many guides out there to find, such as the OECD guidelines. They are existing for so many years, but no one actually cares too much and dive deeper into it. Because it will definitely give you an understanding on what to do. Moreover, we see for grievance mechanisms or compliance mechanisms, technological or digital developments, such as mobile surveys on sites to collect workers' voices. And these mobile survey methods promise to be very much effective in collecting sensitive information because they guarantee a form of anonymity, right? However, again, the biggest problem of honest social dialogue or complaint mechanism in this case is a very deeply rooted one in the fashion industry. And again, only trust, as Monica said before, only trustful partnerships, creating trust, creating a comfort zone for workers, empowering them, providing them with safety, take fear away will help. Because what workers do right now, and this is also reality, they fear retaliation from their managers, from their employers. They fear harsh consequences. And this is a fact. So no hotline, no technological advancement, no tool will be ever really effective without these prerequisites, without trust.
Yeah, and the measurement is really difficult because we often had the problem that if there's no grievance, nobody calls. That means, oh, nobody trusts the helpline. And if too many call, then there are too many problems. So that's, you know, sometimes this subject of KPIs and measurement is challenging. So I wanted to ask you, Nina, how do you see the role of KPIs in a sustainable procurement?
I mean, you always need KPIs. So when I get that question, part of me is like, of course, it's important with KPIs, talking about the conversation that was brought up in terms of when a buying team or a production team or a purchasing team are being measured by speed, price, and sales, and that's it. How are you then going to get the whole having a sustainable material in place? Or so KPI definitely do matter. But I believe one of the biggest challenges is that we are still talking about or working within a space of linear economy and a market economy, where the whole fundamentals of that economy is not built for sustainability. So if you have an economy that has a focus on infinite growth and you have certain systems in place to kind of regulate that, it becomes very difficult to kind of apply sustainable KPIs connected to the social and environmental aspect as well. So I would argue to the extent that, I mean, especially when looking at circular economy, for that to work, we need to reinvent the whole economical side of circular economy. And with that, we need a totally new type of KPIs of measuring systems. But here and now, of course, KPI matters. If you have a team that you measure on price, sales, and also having sustainable materials in the collection, that will create change. But then it also means that you need to be consistent in that. That's also another part. There are efforts being done trying to get that in place, but as soon as the sales are kind of dropping, and if that's connected to longer lead time, connected to, let's say, a more sustainable choice, or the outcome of the fabric wasn't good enough, then that's taken as like an argument, and you kind of drop that kind of KPI. So definitely KPIs, but I would argue that the whole system needs to kind of be refreshed from the 60s to something that is more modern. And with that, we need totally new set of measuring tools.
Okay. Okay, and I think, yeah, we come to the last questions already, because we want to see what the audience want to discuss as well. But Monica, if you had to convince your colleagues or the management or whatever in an organization why more sustainable procurement is worth the investment, what would you do to convince the others?
I think procurement alone, or the procurement team alone, you know, it's a big responsibility and a big weight to try to convince, especially if we're talking about top management who is reluctant maybe to do that extra spend, and perhaps they're less open to hearing about it. I think within your organization, it would be good to recruit some fellow rebels, if we want to call them that way. So kind of a small cross-functional group. So people from other departments, you know, design is super important. It all starts with design. If the design of the product is wrong and not sustainable, based on sustainable principles to start with, then it's not going to become sustainable at the end of it. So design, planning as well, forecasting, because of all that obsolescence that is built into, you know, these large orders where, you know, everything is discounted at the end of it. So I would say create a small group of people maybe that could maybe dedicate 1 hour in a week just to get together, you know, brainstorm, learn from each other, because everybody's responsibilities are different, but act as sustainability advocates, and eventually go to top management. And obviously I think data is super important when you approach top management. You know, there have to be some numbers to back up the claims that it's worth investing this money. So yeah, that proposal for a more sustainable approach should be backed with data, and also at the same time highlighting the risk. Sorry, the risks of not doing that. The risks, you know, already existing within the supply chain, and the risks, you know, because the market is going in this way. It's definitely going this way, and so we have to highlight the risk to the top management of what it means not to embrace sustainability and implement it into the current business model.
Okay, yeah, so bundle our power for change. Yeah. Dennis, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to add something on that, because also from a research and academic perspective, there is very much clear evidence that there's a causal relationship between sustainable procurement and competitive advantage in the market. So you enhance the company's reputation dramatically, significantly. You will increase your market share. There's lots of evidence out there. You gain legitimacy complying with governmental regulations and meeting stakeholder expectations. So I think, and also, of course, in order to meet that legislation, I think there's argument enough to convince the management to take on sustainable steps.
Okay, good. So I think we have only 10 minutes left already, and I think most people want to have a punctual end today. So perhaps you could have a look at the chat and see if we can answer some of the questions there. And can I hand over to, I don't know, who has...
I saw a question connected to me, and I think it was in connection to me saying that there were 370 days of kind of reporting versus if you would harmonize. I'm trying to figure out where it went. As I for a comment. So I guess the question is, more actions can be reflecting as more sustainable, or vice versa. So my answer to that is that there is no one. It's not that simple. It's more about having right focus on which actions you have to create impact. In this case this example that I gave, where one supplier puts 370 days in a year just reporting back on similar and different reports just to report back. It's basically a questionnaire saying, do you have this, do you have not this, etc. And then that's kind of can be audited. So instead of putting 370 days on that, it would be more efficient to do that once and use the remaining 365 days in creating improvement within the supplier to create that impact. So that's kind of, it was my point with that example. So not necessarily, I mean, not all actions can be connected to impact. Sometimes focused action creates more impact than running around doing kind of similar things multiple times.
Okay, then there was another question of Harley. What are the panel views on the current number of certifications and verifiers such as Fair Labor, SIC, FLA, etc., and the lack of consistency in what's reported and how by their members? Anybody wants to take this question?
As I mentioned before, all these certification schemes, all the standards, they turn out to be a farce. That's just because, I mean, from a supplier's perspective, you never deal with only one buyer, right? You have buyers from Europe, you have buyers from different countries, from the US, and the US tend to have different social standards as the European buyers, for instance. So in this case, you are already dealing from a supplier's perspective with different requirements for social standards. I remember very well some conversations with country managers and top management of that factory who told me one day an auditor comes here and they will tell us that the fire extinguisher needs to be that high. The other day for another audit, I need to reposition the fire extinguisher because actually the other standard is asking for another height. So it's just a kind of a game to fulfill a little bit the people's measures and nothing more than that. And never goes into the root causes, like why do we need to have things like that? Why should we not put both in front of emergency exits and so on? These are the things, and of course, from that perspective, while complying with different certification standards and holding still the requirements, the basic requirements, low as possible in terms of price, in terms of lead times, is a very, very balancing act and a very hard act for the suppliers, pressuring them increasingly.
Okay, I think we have time for a last question for Monica from Harley as well. I don't know if you've seen it, Monica, or yeah?
Yes. So a lot of brands have little or no visibility in their upstream operations. Barriers are brands and sourcing partners not wishing to disclose who they're sourcing due to competition concerns. How can we address to improve visibility and compliance with certifiers and verifiers? Yeah, I think that has changed a little bit. There are a lot of brands already, you know, having a full disclosure of the suppliers they work with, and it comes back to this relationship. You know, those brands are confident that they have a healthy business relationship with their supplier, and they're not intimidated that other brands will come along and steal their business or steal the capacity with their supplier, because they've built that solid business relationship. I think that's it. Information exchange is vital for sustainability. So if your supplier is reluctant to share any kind of information, then that's kind of a red flag. And likewise, as a brand, for consumers, if you're reluctant to share where you're manufacturing your goods, you know, because that's it, consumers are more and more concerned with where their products are made. So as a brand, if you're not willing to share where the products are made, then that would be also a red flag for consumers. So we have to get on board with this idea that sharing information is a license to operate, and consumers have the right to know where where their products are made, and likewise suppliers have to offer full disclosure as well about their operations.
Okay, I think there are still some other comments and questions, but it's 5 to 10, at least here in Berlin. So I think we have to hand over to the organizers to end this long day. And yeah, and I want to thank you, the panelists, for sharing your visions and ideas, and hope that our audience found some inspirations in that. And yeah, so just keep going. And I think the most important thing is, doesn't matter how big the step is, but just, you know, move. And I think that's important. And yeah, and thank you all. And I hand over.
Thank you. And thank you guys for that riveting discussion. If anybody who is in our audience today just wants to share a few takeaways or points that really stood out to them, feel free to put those in the chat. Like I said, we're going to be creating a digest of all of our conversations today. So it'll be great to have that recorded for later. But first off, let me just start by thanking all of our panelists and our wonderful moderator. Thank you all for a great session, and thank you to everyone who joined the World Sustainable Procurement Day. This has been a marathon of 24 hours, and this is actually our last session. So I hope that everybody who was able to attend was able to really, get some tidbits and highlights, like I said, that you'll be taking away and actually using in day-to-day practice. Please feel free. We are putting some additional links to our website in the chat. Khaled is helping me out with that. And so if you would like to sign the Sustainable Procurement Pledge or just learn more and get more involved, feel free to go to our website at www.spp.earth or find us on LinkedIn. And anyone is welcome to become an ambassador. So please feel free to join the community. And with that, I think we will end right on time. So thank you all for participating. And please, if you did miss sessions as well, we will be posting them onto our website. So look out for that. Good reason to follow the LinkedIn.
Thank you, Brianna.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Right.